So thank you. So the products that we offer at Essential Education, we have adult basic education. So we have TABE 1314, we have CASAS, and those are both our fundamental, foundational literacy and math programs that we offer. We have GED and HiSET for our high school equivalency for those that are looking to earn their GED. We have a workforce suite. So if you have students that need to practice their soft skills like computer essentials, we have work essentials. So they get those interviewing skills and, how to dress for an interview and, you know, um, how to do just basic everyday job skills that a lot of our adult education learners have not been exposed to. And then we also have our college essentials. If you attended the Educate and Elevate Gala last night, you heard that there were some students that were going on to college. So if they need to refine their college skills for writing and any of the other challenges that they might be facing with not knowing how to approach them when they're in college, we have the classes for that, the lessons for that as well. The wonderful thing that we've done for you as teachers and educators is that we've created with COABE and a professional learning community this guide for overcoming challenges in the adult learning classroom. And what we did was we attacked some of the most common obstacles that they have, like maybe it's trauma. Maybe it's something like not being able to get to class regularly. There are a lot of different ways that our students are challenged to make it into the classroom on a regular basis. And so this is not just a theory-based guide. This is educators that have come together. And as I go through this, sorry, I'm not good at balancing a microphone and a workbook. As I go through the workbook, you'll see we've got very practical ways that we address these issues so that you can put these practical skills to use in your adult education classroom. Sorry, it is early and I have not had coffee. um, this guide is valued at $49.99. Essential Education is giving it away for free for COABE attendees. We have put a lot of time and effort and thought into this, and we would love to get it into your hands. So I have two ways that I'm going to do that this morning. I have some vouchers. I have a stack of books here, but if I run out of them, I also have some vouchers that you can bring down to our booth, number 601 in the exhibitors hall, and just trade that voucher in for one of these workbooks. So I'm going to do it kind of a fun way to wake everybody up. I'm going to have you just kind of shout out, like, I want to see who traveled the furthest. Do I have anybody from like Alaska or Hawaii or Connecticut or somewhere like that? Who thinks they're the furthest away? That works. Where, okay. You're Virginia? Oh, well, I've got one for you too then. Central Asia. Oh, yeah. Definitely getting one of these things. You need to get Oh, Wisconsin. Oh, Wisconsin. Oh, yeah. Goodness gracious, people. All right, raise your hand. I'm just gonna yell. Any birthdays today? April 1. Any birthdays? That's a good one. Well, my birthday is Sunday. Oh, so close enough. All right, raise your hand if you have been in adult education for 5 years or more. 10 years or more. 15 years or more. Wow. I still have, how many hands up? Two, three. Okay, 20 years or more. 25. 30. Woo! Right. That was my last try. Thank you, and congratulations on 30 years. That's impressive. Um, as I said, though, I am leaving a stack of these vouchers with Mike. So make sure at the end of the session, if you want one of those workbooks, that you pick up a voucher and you visit us at booth 601 in the exhibitor hall. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. Thanks. We need the microphone for the Zoom people. So thank you, Valerie, for that. And I'll go ahead and get started. And just introduce myself, I'm Mike Johnson. I'm the National Director for the TABE test within DRC. So we'll go through our information today. And certainly, if you have any questions, I'm open to those questions as we go forward. I will do my best to go through all the content areas that we're talking about today. Some of it was filtered by me. Some of it was filtered by our psychometrician. So some of it I understand, some of it I don't always understand as we go deeper into the statistics of it. But we'll try to make it easy if we can. Of course, it's not going to work now if it's been working the whole time. So let me double check that. That moved. There we go. So we're going to just talk a little bit about TABE real quick to get kind of a quick review. If you don't have time to come to tomorrow's full session about what's happening with TABE and TABE Class E, we'll just touch on a few things today and then kind of go into the presentation. In the description for the presentation, it talked about reading, math, and language. Language did not make the cut from the filtering process, so it will be done. It's just not done yet. So when we're talking today, we're going to mainly talk about reading and math. And we also left off level A, thinking that if you're working past that, then maybe you're above that. So again, the data set that we pulled from for the reports and looking at all the data was a little over 2.5 million rows on a spreadsheet. So it took a lot of filtering out to get down to something that would fit within the hour or so that we had today to talk about that. So I will share these on the app, so you'll have access to the slides. The recording will also be saved on the app, so you can come back and look at that later. But then I also will be working with our publishing partners like Essential Ed or Aztec. Is the part that we haven't completed yet is, what does our data compare to what the publishers are seeing for the lessons that you're assigning to students in some of those technology-based platforms? And that's really what we can use to compare that. So the information that I have today is kind of what skills are showing up on the TABE reports as the deficient areas most often. And then, but is that also correlating to what's being assigned to students? And that's kind of our next step that we want to look at some of the publishing partners and how that works out. So just real quick, and I apologize, I stole this PowerPoint background, and I'm not a big fan of always the floating in and out, so you'll notice that it comes in from every direction. But just real quick, TABE 13 and 14 is available today. We're using data that was pulled from TABE 11 and 12. The objectives are very similar. There's some small little changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in our fuller session for that, on some little changes in the objectives and moving and the percentages. If you're using paper and pencil, that's still supported both for TABE and TABE Class E. So we'll have paper materials available a little bit later. Now that's April, a little bit later this month and going into May for that. But one of the big changes is that there are no big changes in the standards. So there is not a big shift that we saw from 9-10 to 11-12, going from 11-12 now to 13-14. So again, not a big shift, all new questions, but still the same foundation for that. And then the last one is kind of an overall reduction of the testing load on a student. And that's kind of the longer way of saying shorter reading passages, shorter questions on all the parts of the test to help reduce the amount of time a student is spending in the test itself. So we can't take away questions to make the test shorter, because if we take away questions, then we jeopardize the ability to cover the standards, then which affects the ability to get the federal approval to use TABE. So, but what we can do is make some shorter questions, and we'll have some examples of that tomorrow as well in our fuller session. Any questions on TABE before we get started? All right. So just real quick, kind of where we're pulling a lot of this information from is this is our main website, tabetest.com. And up across the top, there's a resources tab. That's generally where you want to go to find out any new information related to TABE. There's always going to be a floating bar in the middle there, and it has some information about TABE 13 and 14. But really, the main spot where everything gets posted is under the resource tab. There's an 11 and 12 section. There's a 13, 14 section. There's a TABE Class E for A and B and C and D for the ESOL students. So always going under that resource section, that's where the new blueprints are posted already for 13 and 14, and for C and D as well on the ESL side. So jumping right into it, this is the blueprint for level E of reading and kind of the number of questions that are associated to each of those areas. Any guesses on which of those areas is the most difficult area? Or the most difficult for your students? Key ideas and details. That was a close one, and probably because it's one of the larger ones, but it actually by a hair was craft and structure. And I say by a hair because sometimes, some of these are 1 or 2 percentage points away. So it's where is the most deficient area? And then we kind of dig into that a little bit more. So craft and structure was at level E. It'll be interesting to see how that carries on to other forms as we go forward. But then within craft and structure, then we look at, what are the standards and sub-skills that are being addressed. And what we notice is that there's 1 high emphasis and 3 medium emphasis. That relates to how many questions are associated to those skills within those total number of questions that are on the test. And these, again, are from the blueprints, so they're all available on tabetest.com. Now, when we dig in a little deeper to say what skills are being missed most often or what skills are being listed on the TABE report, this is where we come into the information for craft and structure at level E. So that determine the meaning of a phrase in context. Those are those skills that are most often showing up on that 2nd and 3rd page of the TABE report for programs. One interesting update for TABE 13 and 14 is that standard number that's here in the middle column that's listed on the blueprint will now start being listed on this TABE report on that 2nd page with the skills. So you'll have both the TABE skill on the left-hand side, which is just a shorter version of the college and career readiness kind of standard for that because we don't have a lot of room to always fill in the right-hand column on a TABE report. We try to summarize it a little bit. But then the standard number will now start to be appearing on the reports for you for TABE 13 and 14. Anybody have any comments on do these areas seem like the ones that are most often that you're covering in your lessons? Okay. And again, some of them may be on a TABE report, might be the partially proficient or the non-proficient areas. It might be a mix of those as I was sorting the data to see how often these standards in the middle were showing up on the reports for the data. So I most often it's going to be in the non-proficient areas, but sometimes it does show up to be the partially proficient. And maybe it comes a little bit more when we get into the middle parts of TABE. So our next one is looking at, I also am going to go back a couple of slides here real quick on the blueprint. So you guys guessed key ideas and details, and some of you said craft instruction. They are both very close, so that's why I also included on the report kind of where were the most missed key ideas and details skills as well. So looking at that from an area, these 3 of responding to basic questions about key details. So you can kind of see, a little bit of that responding and recounting in details and being kind of the key area at level E. And we'll see that change a little bit when we get into level M and level D for these kind of same common areas. So moving to level M, again, it's probably going to be obvious again because the 2 bigger sections are probably the ones that have the most challenge into it. But it turns out to be key ideas and details on this one. So earlier it was craft and structure. Now, as we move up to level M, sure. These are the most oftenly appearing on the TABE 2nd and 3rd page of the individual report. So the skills that are showing up as the areas of focus skill. It probably is, yeah. And I didn't, yes, and we didn't get that detailed because those didn't show up as often. So a little bit less. So, um, well, craft and structure will probably be equal to what integration of our key ideas and details, just because they're the total number of questions. So I think that's an area. But yeah, now as a percentage of where's the most missed areas that will help drive improvement on the post test, if I was missing the majority of the 11%, is that going to help me as much as it would if I'm missing half of key ideas and details? Yes, sure. There are more. Yeah. So if we go to, let me get this one. So the high emphasis you're meaning? Yeah, so high emphasis means that there's more questions related to that standard within the key. This one is key ideas and details. There was an older belief, and I was guilty of this in the past too, that high emphasis meant that that skill was covered on both 11 and 12, where medium meant it was on 11 or 12, and low meant that it might be on one, but with very few questions. That was kind of disproven by our content team as they're writing the test. They said, no, that's not the. So that was kind of an urban legend that was out there for a while, that's what high and low. And it does relate to the number of questions that are on the test for that specific skill. So when our test development team, the writers of the test will get their assignments, and they're supposed to write X amount of questions that are high emphasis versus medium. And we don't necessarily publish what that amount is. Even getting this data was a little bit of a challenge from our test development team, because they don't want you guys to teach to the test. They would like you to teach to the standard. So they want you to be back here teaching the key ideas and details, because there's going to be pieces of those that are being introduced, pieces of those that are being covered extensively, and then some that are maybe just from review from the level E one as we're moving up. So there's kind of that always mix. Yep. In a general sense across, yep, and where these skills are showing up most often across the 2.5 million tests that we looked at in the last year for this area. Yep. So again, let me jump forward here a little quick. So if we are where level M, key ideas and details was the most frequently missed area, and then within that, now we're looking at when we start to get into level M, we start to see more skills being addressed, because level M is always that kind of in between or middle ground where there's a lot of skills, and we certainly see this coming up on math. But we do still have high emphasis areas for those level M skills of determining the theme of a story and determining the main idea. And as we go into what was most frequently missed, now it's a little bit shorter of a list on that key ideas and details, but more so focusing on emphasis in those areas and summarizing the text. So again, I think we start to see a common theme through this, and I've stared at it for many weeks and going through that, so I get to see a little bit more than just what you're seeing today in the hour. But again, I have the access to the slides, and we'll add more data with the publishers as well, so that they get a little bit more complete picture as we go forward. I did include craft structure, and I apologize, I didn't see that little highlighting there, but that's just bad work. But craft and structure, there were a lot of craft and structure skills, so that we see more deficient areas, and just that listed on this, like this one versus key ideas and details, it usually means that the percentages were very close. Whereas in the previous slide where there's just 3 of them, those were by and large, the ones that were being missed most often, being assigned on the report more often. The skills that are on your second and third page of the individual profile report can be sent to you nightly, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But also we can send them to the publishing partner. So Aztec and Essential Ed can receive that data file, and many people have it go to them nightly so that they're assigning these automatically. And I think that's what we want to look. I mean, obviously it's going to be the same data, but before that happens, on what are the teachers assigning automatic or by hand in those systems compared to what the test is assigning is another area that we're going to dig into. So as we move on to level D of reading, again, we have those bigger areas. There's a little bit of a difference because integration of knowledge and ideas becomes the most frequently deficient area on level D. So a little bit different, the percentages and how often those are areas are showing up. And again, it's probably because this is a little bit more covered at level D than it was on the other areas. And if we dig deeper into that, here we have only the one high emphasis area. So as we start to move up, we start to get a little bit more detailed into that kind of areas of the standards that are being addressed. But you'll notice on the standard number, if you're familiar with them, you're kind of the number roughly represents the grade level. So we see 8.RL.8. So it's the high emphasis one is a higher level standard as well that's being addressed at level D. So these most frequent ones, again, on the left-hand side, of the identifying and quantifying areas for the integration of knowledge and idea level D. My question, as we kind of go through this, is what are you doing already that's similar to this or different from this? Are you looking at the details this much from your individual reports for TABE when you go into those areas, or are you looking just strictly at this report and going with what's being listed on the report? I'm just kind of understanding, are you looking at different information? Are you trying to dig into that? Yes. It does for the most part, yes. Yeah, so if you're both fully not proficient through all of the areas, then they would likely have the same ones assigned to them. If you're partially proficient in one area and not proficient in another, then they'll start to differ a little bit from that. Yes, yep. So the weight of the partially proficient and the not proficient and the fully proficient all is tied back to the questions that are and the skills that are associated with that. Yep. Yeah. This is the sections of the crosswalk. Yes. Yep. Yes, it is in final editing last Friday as of an email I got last Friday they were working on. So I haven't gotten an update yet this week, but it should be done very shortly and posted to the resource tab. Yep. And we can look at that. I mean, they put it on this PDF just to make it a little bit cleaner and not editable for different changes from that standpoint. But the nightly transfer, the nightly data file is where all this also is included in already in an Excel file. So that might be an area, and we can talk about that a little bit more separately. That maybe if you do use the raw data versus the PDF a little bit more often, getting that nightly file might be more helpful from you. The nightly file is a little bit different than the on-demand extract that you can run yourself in the system. The on-demand extract doesn't include all the skill information that we're talking. It stops before that. We're also kind of working on that to see if we can update that. It becomes a much larger file because it has all the skills and all the proficiencies, but the nightly file does have all that information. That's the same one that we send to Aztec and Essential Ed so that they can digest it into their system. You had a question back there? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's again, you and the reports do come out all the, and I know for 13 and 14, you'll get the newest one first. I know some people like that you get all the reports. Some people need all the previous data, but the newest one will always be, should be always the first one now coming on the PDF file. So that might help it be a little clearer for 13 and 14. I think it used to be the last one in the case, and now it's been moved in that order for that. But in the question. Yep. So if you're using paper and pencil, I strongly encourage you to scan your answer sheets. There's no cost to scan your answer sheets. And if you scan them, you have access to all the same reports that you have from the online test. Because once you scan your answer sheet, it goes into our portal, and then you run the individual profile. You can run the locator report. You can run the extract report. So if you're hand scoring are you using the Scories answer sheets? So then you'd have to do the diagnostic profile separately for that as another hand piece. The scanning in the old days, let's say in the 9-10 days, it required a Scantron scanner that was probably $5,000 or $6,000, and it required the software from us that was $2,500. When we switched to 11 and 12, we switched to image-based scanning, which uses an image-based scanner that starts around $200, and there's no cost to use the scanning portal on our website. So it's free to scan. You just have to use a compatible scanner. And if you do that, all your data is together. All your data can go. If you're in a state that all the LACES states, if you're reporting into LACES, we transfer that data right to LACES. We do that with the other vendors as well, and a few of the states that have their proprietary systems. So as long as you're scanning or taking it on the computer, all that data is one central spot. Yeah, so tape 13 and 14 will have one single answer sheet instead of having that 8 answer sheets that 11 and 12 has. So just real quick as we stop there on that kind of discussion is today reading, and since we're in that kind of reading area, has those 2-part reading questions on 11 and 12. There's 3 of them on level E. There's 15 of them on level A. That's why there's individual answer sheets, mostly because the real estate that it takes to put bubbles on a page for 3 questions is less than it takes to put space on the page for 15 of those questions. So for 13 and 14, to solve that, there's a standard number. I think it's 5 or 6 total questions that are 2-point questions. They're always in the same spot, so they can now have one single answer sheet for each of those areas. So you'll go back to what we did in 9-12 or 9-10 and mark E, M, D, or A on the bubble sheet, and the scanner will pick that up for that. But if you have more questions about scanning, just let us know. We have the exhibit stuff downstairs from here. But yeah, it's much easier. You may already have a scanner that's compatible. They look like a fax machine now that you kind of see at the doctor's office when they scan your insurance card. It's very similar to that. So if you're doing something already in your office with a scanner, it might be already compatible for TABE, both 11, 12, and 13 and 14, and for TABE Class C for the ESL side. So again, just to kind of finish up with reading and looking at, again, the feedback on what you're doing. So again, we kind of heard that initially the reports are a little overwhelming to get all that data together, and maybe the PDF isn't the right way to sort that. And so we can certainly look at the Excel file or make it into a different file. We would love to move to a new platform within DRC. We're the only assessment that doesn't use what we call interactive reporting, and we're trying to push ourselves to that. But interactive reporting would let you be a little bit more flexible in creating more ad hoc type of reports. So, the classroom report of if Mike Johnson is the teacher and we do intake as a large group, but afterwards these 15 students become Mike Johnson students, let me see that report. And you can do that a little bit with TABE today. You can run a test session report, but everybody has to be in that test session. And so it's not getting into the detail, but we have the ability to do that with our interactive reporting system, and we're just kicking and screaming to get there. Yes. Not soon, like this half of the first year. No. Yeah. Right. Yep. Yeah. So I think that's, what they're missing in when we start into the math, I think those skill areas, they do become a little bit more common. Again, we looked at out of the, I think, 8 million tests that were done last year, we're looking at about 3 million of them in the records that we sorted through that. So a fairly good sample of that, of what are being assigned to students, whether they're through Essential Ed or Aztec. But now the next step is we want to dig a little deeper and get into more detail. Yep. You could possibly do that once we have that. Yes. Yep. You could do a lot more. Yes, taking a group of students, I have 100 people, I want to see 5 of them together as a group, or think something like that. So yep. And again, we can kind of do that today with the Excel file if we want to sort the data that way and just get it into Excel format, but getting it into more of a report format would be easier to be done with interactive reporting. So if you keep asking me for it, then I keep asking for it internally, and we keep pushing for it. But right. Well, that's good feedback. I mean, if I guess, do you guys turn these reports over to the students for them to see, or are you just using it for the teachers? Turn them over. So it's a kind of a mix of both of the, if a student is getting the report and kind of seeing what they need to work on versus if just the teachers are working on that. Yes. Yep. Right. Yeah, and we haven't. I mean, one way, a long way of doing that would be to assign a person just a math test. So during intake, you might take reading, math, and language all in one test ticket. You can take that over several days, but they will always show up on the report the same. If I create a test ticket just for math, then that report will always just be math. It'll leave the reading and the language blank. And so it's a little bit extra work. It doesn't cost anything more. It's just more work of assigning Mike Johnson 3 separate test tickets instead of doing one test ticket that they could use over and over again for those areas. So, but it's good feedback to have, maybe a way you can just pull up math results or language results for that. Yep. Yeah, reading and math kind of language is always going to be on page 3, I think, but reading might some on page 1, and sometimes it's on page 2 or yeah. So we'll look at that. That's good feedback. So let's jump into the math and just kind of go through those areas. And again, we'll start to see math has more skill, a lot more pieces to the pie here on the math side than we saw in reading. But again, the number of questions, obviously, if we think about that from the number and operation area, and I'm double checking if measurement and data might be a misprint there. I'll have to double check that with 6 questions. But the area that's most often is number and operation for base 10 for those math skills at level E. And again, we'll kind of see that carry over into the other areas as we start to go up. But if we look at what's being covered, now we have a lot of skills, or a lot of standards that are being addressed, and very few of them, and in none in this case, going up into the high emphasis areas. We're just seeing the medium emphasis, and again, those kind of introductory math skills that are being built as a foundation. But then if we look at the most frequently missed areas for number and operation, we start to see the beginnings of multiplication, the rounding topics that are being covered in those areas of those foundational skills, and working on some of the multi-digits being introduced even at level E. Certainly, I think these are a little bit one of the higher end or higher level skills that are covered at level E, and the ones obviously that are most oftenly assigned. Now for level M, this is Thanksgiving. Everybody gets a piece of pie out of the pie chart, and a lot of smaller areas. Just to know, and one of those other areas that we can talk about, if you haven't noticed it, some people like to add up the number of questions on page 1 of the report, and it doesn't always add up to the total number of questions on the test. In order to be measured, you have to have at least 4 questions. So these, the number system, maybe it's not, I know for sure ratios and statistics where those are 3 and 5% are 3 questions. They're not 4 questions. So that's why they don't show up in the other parts of the reports. They're being introduced because they're part of the standards, but they're not being measured at level E or level M in this case, because there's only 3 questions on the test related to that. So only for us, you have to have 4 questions to be a measurable skill area or domain. So again, expressions and equations, kind of in level M, that more deficient area, it is one of the bigger ones for the topics. And then we look at those different, the blueprint areas, and we start to see the numbers, the 6th grade. So we're getting the higher level skills being the ones that are showing up on level M for expression and equations. And then those most frequently missed areas for level M, these 3 kind of appear most often. And you also notice that the middle number, the standard number, there's a lot of skills that go into a standard. So that standard number sometimes is repeated over again. And if it was up to our test development team, they want you to focus on that middle column and teach to the standard. And so that you're prepared as far as you're going, whether it's through your high school equivalency, but you're prepared through all the iterations of that standard and the coverage of that standard. Number in operation, just because it was a larger area or a close percentage for that. So again, the number in operation areas of solving kind of that mix of that real world, a little bit longer of the, both of these mention real world problems. How do we relate that to, real world issues or real world topics in your instructional plan versus just kind of that memorization of those areas? And I think that's a key area for the standards and kind of how to apply the skills versus computation. Again, at level D for that content area, I think my batteries are dying on this. But level D, we see one thing that's going to carry over is the expression and equations still continues to be that deficient area. So needing a little bit more reinforcement maybe in those areas as you're working up. So whether you're at high level M, beginning level D, you're kind of in that high school equivalency prep area. So you're moving over into more of that test prep kind of planning purpose and, seeing the skills that are being covered. And, we're seeing just a few high emphasis areas or high and medium emphasis area as we're kind of touching on those key areas and again, more the 8th grade type of levels on level D for those content areas. It's always important to remember 8th grade in college and career readiness doesn't always equate to what you think 8th grade is. So as you dig into those standards, I always go back to, you can't think about it. You can't think about your own experience in 8th grade because standards have changed several times. If you've been out of school for 10, 15, 20, 25, 40 years. So, that goes back to why don't we have grade equivalents on the test anymore like we had in TABE 9 and 10? Well, a grade equivalent is not a standardized valid score. It's kind of a relatable score. And we do have grade ranges now. We have and we'll talk more about that in our session tomorrow. There are grade ranges available for TABE, but they're just guidelines. They're not measurable scores for that purpose. But what your perception of a grade range is versus what the standard says, if you dig into these standards, especially here at level D and certainly in level A, you're talking more about AP math now, not necessarily just regular math, high school math. So, we're not thinking on a scale of K to 12. We're thinking on more K to 14 on the skills that are being covered within the K to 12 range for that purpose. So it's always, how do I get to that highest score on the GED? Well, I have to take a more rigorous assessment to get to those kind of alignment areas that are going to get me that college credit on the GED level for that. So looking at level D math and the most frequently kind of missed areas, now we start to see more of the graphing and the linear equations for that. So certainly higher level math skills, certainly on expressions and equations. How many people are going into upper levels of D content in your instruction? How many people are using level A? Maybe I should have started with that. So quite a few people that use level A. I think, that's the area of our research shows that you're high school equivalency ready at NRS level 4, at the start of NRS level 4. So that's a 536 on reading, 537 on math. Being minimally ready for the high school equivalency means you're not going to necessarily be ready for what career area you might want to go into, or what might be a requirement for a post-secondary program for placement. So if I minimally pass the high school equivalency test and I have to take a placement test at my post-secondary institution, I might have to go back into a remedial skills before I can move into the 4-credit side. So I think, when we think about why is level D and certainly level A more rigorous, it's again to prepare for what's possible after you're leaving adult education for those purposes. So in level D, statistics and probability was also a big area that had common deficient areas. And so if we go back to the pie chart real quick to see where that percentage is kind of laid out. So statistics and probability down there in the green, or now it's yellowish, for that is 22%, but it also is very often assigned as one of the deficient areas. So we have that as the secondary resource for most frequently missed skill areas. And I think, again, how do we drill this down to the next level? Is it possible to get down even further? If we're going to go back to our hand scoring of the test, if you're hand scoring a test, the one benefit is that number question was wrong on the test. So I know question 5 was measuring this skill because I can do that on the individual diagnostic profile. So a lot of people ask, can we have an item analysis report for TABE like we, again, used to have with TABE 9 and 10? But an item analysis might not cover all these skills because it might be something that was covered on level on 11 and not on 12, because it is maybe that lower medium emphasis area. So it is still important to think about the standard and what's being taught on that standard and why, because that standard is going to carry over to the next level that you're going into, whether it's TABE or into a high school equivalency for that purpose. So again, just to wrap up math, and how is language important? Would you like to see this information for language? Is there a lot of use of language? So again, I just didn't have enough time to get through all the data, but I have it all, and I just have it partially sorted right now. So I can certainly keep working on this and get this posted information. We are planning on sharing it. There was some thought of having this as being a co-presented session with some of the publishing partners, but then they start to battle, and whose content gets more time. So, but I think all the publishing partners kind of have the same information on what lessons are being assigned most often versus what deficient areas the TABE test. So we want to work with them to kind of get that idea of where that information needs to. And I'll certainly add the language test into this, and so you have that information as well. Just a couple of things on the individual profile. So if we're looking at this again, one of the new updates to the individual profile up in the top right corner will be the addition of a next recommended test level. So if you're taking, and this is probably a bad example because it's a level A test, but it is measuring your NRS level and your ability to make a measurable skills gain on that level of test. So if I took a level M test and did very well on it, my next test has to be a level D to show any measurable skills gain. This will now show up in the report. It shows up as also, I think you can see it very faintly in the math section there. There's an asterisk next to the NRS level. So in TABE 11 and 12, we had plus and minus signs on the scale score. Does anybody know what those mean? Yep, so that was probably the best answer, a high and a low area on that scale range. Some people thought it was valid or not valid, and they had a retest. So it really just was an indicator for you as a teacher. If I saw a minus sign on a scale score, that meant that they were the lowest possible score at that NRS level. So for you as a teacher, I needed to make the full jump to the next NRS level. They weren't in the middle and making a small jump. They had to make a full jump. If I saw the plus sign, it was very similar to this asterisk that there is no more room to grow at that level, and you needed to the next test needed to move up a level. A lot of people had a lot of different ideas on what they meant, even though the words are in the middle there in the kind of the middle footnote area. So we got rid of those for 13 and 14, and we'll just have the asterisk, and we'll have that column on what the next recommended test level is for that. This next recommended column is also done in a graph that's already posted to tabetest.com. So if you want to see it in a whole chart with all the numbers, it's posted there under the resource tab as well for that. Yep. The scoring guide, yeah. Is it available or will it be available? It is being developed and going through the process. So where we're at with 13 and 14, just to give you an idea, all the test booklets and all the answer sheets are done in the warehouse or in the process of getting in the warehouse. And those are the easy things to do manufacturing wise. The next step is the test directions and the scoring guide pieces because they refer specifically the test directions because they refer to page numbers and sections and different things. So they're the last piece. So they're going through all the final edits right now. And that's why the order forms haven't been posted to the website for the people that need paper and pencil materials, but they will be posted shortly, both in a PDF. And the PDF versions of some of those manuals are in the portal. So if you are scanning or using TABE Online, there is a resource section inside the portal. So you go to the documents section or the general information, and then you go into documents, and that's where all those manuals will be posted for that purpose. So the individual profile on the second and third page is not a big change. What we've been working on today is that far right column of the areas for next focus. They're not called weaknesses because they may be moving up, and it's not listed here on this side, but if you ever do see in the performance column that full proficiency, that's why it's not called a weakness. The full proficiency, there's always going to be skills in the right-hand side, but they're the next level higher skills. So, some people have always asked, if I'm fully proficient on key ideas and details, how come there's skills listed in that far right-hand box? Well, because you took a level M test, and those are the level D skills. So you need to what you're going to work on next. At level A, you would see empty boxes on that far right-hand side once you have full proficiency of those skill areas. So that's the main reason why it's called area of next focus and not just a weakness for that purpose. Talked a little bit about the nightly transfer. Just know that that's available. It is a daily file. So if you have some skills of database management, it's fairly handy. If you're looking at it as an Excel file and something you want to do, it might get a little overwhelming because every day we send you yesterday's testing data. The very first time you get that file, you get all your historical data. So it's a huge file the first day, but every day after that, it's just the previous day. So it is a lot of files that are sent to you, and they're sent to an FTP site just for you to download, so you don't have to download them all at one time. Question? If you've asked us to send it to them, then it's something that you have to request of us to send it to either or both of those vendors. Yep. Is anybody doing that today, having their data go into one of those vendors? And do you find it helpful? Okay. Yeah, if they're moving around. Yep. Anybody else having that going to their system today? Okay. Yep. There is sometimes there's a setup cost depending on who you're talking to. So I think it's listed at like $250 a one-time setup cost. But there are times that the whole state gets set up at one time, so then that gets included in a state contract for that. So we can always work on that. Yep. Correct. So, and I think with both Essential Ed and Aztec, you as a teacher have the ability to accept the nightly file, or you still have the ability to assign your own lessons, or you also have the ability for the student to take the assessment within those systems and have the system assign a lesson based on that. So that was kind of the one thing that both of those vendors wanted to make sure that the teacher had control to have those lessons assigned. It's just a resource to get it imported automatically if you want to use it that way. So some people are just looking at this report and assigning these skills and by hand. So it is a time savings to have the computer just do that on a nightly basis and assign those lessons. Other people are saying, I want to look at all this and find the one that's common for my program and focus on that maybe as our in-person instruction and have them work on other things as a remote instruction or virtual instruction. So there are a lot of different ways. Yep. Yeah. Well, and so yeah, and I think that's the how do we get more efficient with the data and help sort and apply that for that. Yep. Other comments on what might be helpful and helping kind of guide instruction and help, target the instruction that you need. I think we've had a lot of good examples so far today on what would be helpful. And I think that most frequently missed areas is a lot to digest today. So that's why you certainly want to follow up on the app. I'll have it all posted on the app. I think my information is on the next slide. So if you want it quicker, then you can always shoot me an email and I'm happy to send it to you quicker from that. If you're ever having questions, then there is our support number. So if you're having problems with online testing or scanning, that's the support number. You have free access to them. That's not a general customer service one for ordering materials. That's the support number, just so that you know that. And then the tabetest.com is where you generally get all the resources for that information. Yeah, yes, I've heard that before. Yes. Yep. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I will certainly pass that on. Other comments, questions, gripes, complaints? Yep. I thought that getting, uh, yeah, yeah, and I thought they adjusted the extract or the nightly file that I thought it was. So I think because we added the locator scores into for 13 and 14, so it's new. LACES is a little bit unique because there's some states that use LACES that allow you some time to enter the student into LACES, and this might be a shock to some people, but there are states out there that they have up to 30 or 60 days to enter a student into the data system. So they may come in and test today, but you as a program don't sit down and put them into the data system for a couple of weeks. Other people have to do it right away, so I don't want to embarrass anybody that's doing it right away. But so for the LACES file, it's the only file that we do it to, not any of the other nightly files. We send the data for 60 days, the same data. So today's data, when it gets reported tomorrow, it gets reported the next 60 days. And LACES is looking for Mike Johnson that tested today, but that local program didn't add Mike Johnson into LACES for another 3 weeks. So that score can catch up to them or connect with them. So I think that's where that issue came in, and I thought it was corrected, but I'll double check that. Yeah, right. There's only a few states that have some flexibility that let them. I thought it was 30 or 45 days was the maximum, so that's why we set it at 60. So they have up to 45 days to get them in the data system, which is a little concerning for that. Other comments, concerns? So again, appreciate your time today. We do have another session tomorrow that will go a little bit more in depth into both TABE 13, 14, and Class E. But I'm certainly available downstairs in the exhibit area the rest of the time. But thank you very much.